session, Mahmoud Ali Youssouf is on a 4-day tour of the Confederation of Sahel States aimed at strengthening ties between the African Union and the alliance's member state. The visit began in Mali, where he met Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation Minister Abdoulaye Diop and Minister for Malians living abroad and African integration, Mossa Attaher. Now, Mali's foreign ministry says the visit marks a new phase in relations between Bamako and the African Union. Youssouf is in Burkina Faso today for talks focused on deepening those cooperation between the AU and Burkina Faso. For more on this, we're now joined on the line by Aigbe, Advocacy Officer at the West African Democracy Solidarity Network. Austin, a pleasure to have you in our company. Thank you so much for your time. Let's get right into it. Give us a sense then in terms of how important it is for the African Union, particularly the chair, Mahmoud Ali Youssouf, to choose to visit the Confederation of the Sahel States at this particular time.
Again, thank you very much for having me, and good morning. First is to recognize that the AU chair, Youssouf, is new on the seat. And apparently, he wasn't part of those who had placed the sanctions in 2021 when Mali and Co. exited a democratic setting. And then you are aware that ECOWAS has also did almost the same thing that the EU has done. And now, for ECOWAS, the three Sahel states have pulled out from that cooperation with ECOWAS. But African Union tend to have suspended Mali in 2021. Mali specifically, and among others eventually. So what this visit means is that His Excellency Youssouf is sending a new signal that we want cooperation, we want support, we want to see how we can work together. Part of what he has taken to Mali is on some form of security cooperation, security collaboration, which is very vital for the fall of Mali. In my opinion, I think that it's beneficial more to Mali than to the African Union. Yeah. But this is the first step in what I consider as diplomatic. It's left for the Malian government, and of course the Sahel leaders, to yield to the call from the African Union. So by way of maybe rethinking of what approach that I've been taking. You also recall when the leadership of ECOWAS changed to President Abdoulaye of Sierra Leone, he also did a kind of visit in an attempt to try to put a new face in the conflict between in the conflict within the region. And I think Mali does need African Union at this time.
Yeah, and how far do you think this diplomatic position then will go in terms of just quelling or calming those tensions between, some of these countries? We know that, of course, he is obviously sending some kind of message by engaging directly with Mali, Burkina Faso, and, of course, the other Sahel Alliance members.
Well, it is very significant because it's coming in with no baggage, so to say, no baggage. You can accuse him of what may have happened before when the Sahel state tried to attend the African Union meeting and all of those deprivation or that maybe the suspension or thereabout. So it's coming in with a new case that we can cooperate, we can revisit. We are Africans. What Mali is facing today, arguably, it is only Bamako that is a bit safe, compared to maybe not the other side, maybe the Kai region heading towards Senegal, which is also a bit safer. But then Bamako is at the verge of collapse. At this time, Mali, specifically Mali, can no longer rely on Russia for safety. Haven't brought up France and ECOWAS. At this time, I think, because of the strategic positioning of Mali, because of its position in the Sahel Confederation, it does have an opportunity to truly think of what the African Union is bringing, which is more of countering insurgency, security cooperation. At this time, they are not talking about democracy. They're not talking about election. I'm sure that is just a snowball to gradually get to the democratic conversation, which of course had happened with Chad. You recall the African Union after David died at that conflict, and eventually the son emerged a military leader. It was the AU who had to facilitate the return to democracy, even while it was a military government.
Yeah.
And eventually, this kind of cooperation may lead to that kind of child example.
Yeah. On that, when we talk about the fact that there are other implications, for instance, the implications of the AES distancing itself from ECOWAS while remaining a member of the African Union. Just give us a sense then in terms of how, some of those implications could also affect these talks.
So the African Union will have to be the bigger brother, because at least the continental organization, even the ECOWAS, does rely on African Union for certain cooperation and support. For ECOWAS, it is going to be, even if Mali or the Sahel State are returned to African Union as military aids, it does contravene the African Union protocol on good governance and democracy, which of course is part of the protocol that ECOWAS has used to suspend this Sahel State, which eventually led to the exit of the Sahel State. And importantly to mention that the reason why the Sahel State had exited ECOWAS is because they were planned by ECOWAS to invade Niger after the coup in that country. But what is important to state, which is very critical, is that African Union did not make any attempt to invade any of the Sahel States. And that is why that cooperation is easy to come from that African Union perspective. In fact, at the level of Wademos, we have called on African Union last year to intervene. We have called on the United Nations to intervene. That at this time, the return of this Sahel State to ECOWAS cannot happen by ECOWAS positioning alone. It has to happen from some form of an external mediation. And that is why our civil society organizations, we have also played our part to try to intervene as citizens. But it is important, what AU will do is to come in at a higher level. What the United Nations will do is to come in at a higher level and then synchronize this relationship, and gradually, because if this Sahel State return to democracy and they apply to ECOWAS, because they may have to reapply, because the window is still open. ECOWAS has not shut the door totally, even though they've granted their exit, they are still hoping that at some point there will be a return, because as you know, this is a military regime that took the decision, not a democratic administration. It didn't take the decision through the parliamentary agreement. It was one individual taking a decision on behalf of the peoples of this country, which I think is not democratic. And ECOWAS, being a democratic organization, we have to listen. If these countries return to democracy and reapply, they will be accepted.
Yeah, just as we wrap up very quickly, Kenneth, sorry, I beg your pardon, Austin. You mentioned earlier on the importance of civil society also intervening here. I mean, how practical is that, given the fact that there are also concerns about, can the AU really serve as a bridge between the Sahel Alliance and ECOWAS, given the fact that there are fears that the divide could be too deep?
So that is why it actually stays within the African Union. Yes, the divide is deep. The Sahel State does not have cooperation with ECOWAS. It does also have cooperation with countries like Algeria, which is just on the other side of the divide. Mm-hmm. So what is important, that's why I mentioned, Wademos did mobilize some very senior civil society, senior citizens in West Africa to intervene. We did that 2 years ago, but even though the conversation is still on, we are hoping that if government to government hasn't worked, maybe citizens to government may work. So with African Union coming, those have a strategic positioning, because one, Youssouf is new, and that brings a new face. So this is not like the kind of intervention that had happened before. This is clearly an individual who may have a bigger understanding of what path to go. And like I said, it's more like a correlation of what happened when Madabio, the president of Sierra Leone, went to visit the Sahel State in a course to bring them back. Yeah. And I think that's where countries like Ghana, President Mahama, does also have a huge role to play because of its strategic positioning at the African Union.
Austin, thank you so much for that. Let's leave it there for now. Really do appreciate your time. Austin, of course, is Advocacy Officer at the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. All right, we are a minute late for news, but it is time for that. Let's take you straight to news.
SABC News.